Liz and I, and Willie Kolska, also from Liz's organization, we presented a workshop looking at different tools along the climate adaptation continuum. And I'm not going to go through the whole presentation, which was developed for the workshop. I'm going to kind of zoom right in on this vulnerability assessment methodology. Since we've been talking all day, we all understand the context within which we're working, so I'm just going to zoom through some of these. Oops. Okay, so just for a context, so I work for an organization called the Pacific Islands Climate Change Cooperative, and it's a slightly different situation than what we've been hearing about today, because it's a self-organizing organization of different agencies, research institutions, indigenous organizations, educational institutions, large landowners, who have all voluntarily come together because they're concerned about climate change and they want more information tools and adaptation strategies. So we have a slight advantage in the fact that we don't need to convince our partners that climate change is important. They've voluntarily come to the table, and we are not, we're not a community organizing or training organization. Our partners do that. So what we do is we work with our partners in developing information and tools that they can incorporate into their existing training programs. So that means we're kind of an intermediary organization. But when we first organized back in 2009, one of the tools our partners said they wanted pretty much immediately was a vulnerability assessment, so that they could assess vulnerability of biological and cultural resources. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey down that path since then. Let's see. This is just to recognize that there's a team of folks that are working on developing this tool, and I am here to represent them, but I'm not on the team, I'm not a scientist, so I can't get too technical in my explanation of the tool. And let's see. So, well, I'll just back up. So vulnerability assessment. So our partner said we want a tool and we want it now. And so we asked the question of why. What are you going to use it for? And because we have such a diverse partnership, we have, for example, agencies that have to implement endangered species laws and regulations. And we have private landowners, and we have schools. So we have such a diverse membership that when we surveyed them and asked them, why do you want this tool? What are you going to use it for? It was really hard to find consensus. You know, there were a lot of different answers across the board. But we were able to prioritize that everybody's pretty concerned about some key species, because those are driving the regulatory burdens on our partners, and they want to have a little bit more certainty about how climate change is going to impact these species and their habitats. So we decided to, within the larger context of planning for adaptation for biocultural resources, we decided to look at a suite of species starting in the Hawaiian Islands. And we also took into account the fact that the region that we're working in, so that includes the region that Liz was just talking about, Micronesia, Hawaiian Islands, American Samoa. Within this region, there's not a lot of hard data. There's a lot of information that is needed and recognized, but not a lot of what Western scientists would call robust data. There are also a lot of other threats, and we've already gone through that today about making sure that you're not looking at climate threats in isolation. And then, as I mentioned, there are a large number of species that are kind of driving a lot of the legal and regulatory actions. There are over 350 species that are listed under the United States Endangered Species Act. Actually, that just rose to over 400 within the last couple of years. So that places a tremendous regulatory burden on all of these jurisdictions in dealing with creating management strategies for those species. So we decided to take a look at existing vulnerability assessment tools, and we realized that most of the tools out there didn't exactly suit what our partners needed. And because the tool is only useful if people will use it, we realized we needed to adapt some of the existing tools out there. We needed something that was perhaps a little less reliant on having scientific experts available, and something that you could, if you had that expertise available, you could actually link up the tool with any kind of quantitative research, or even climate projection, climate models and projections. And something that incorporated the other threats that we've also talked about today. So our lead scientist on this project, after spending a lot of time talking to experts around the world that have developed vulnerability approaches, he decided to adopt an approach that's kind of taken off in many different areas, but not so much in the Pacific Islands, and it's called the Bayesian network model. It's essentially a logic model, and since I'm not a scientist, I asked him to explain it to me in very simple terms, and I'm gonna get to that right now. Okay, so I asked him, I said, how should I, as a non-scientist, think about this model? Why would it be something that I would be interested in trying to promote to communities or natural resource managers? And he said, well, think about the decisions that you make when you're making a cup of coffee in the morning. You get to the office and you think about whether that coffee is going to be a good cup of coffee or is it going to be a bad cup of coffee. And there are a lot of factors that go into the quality of that cup of coffee. So you can use a Bayesian network model to assess whether or not that's actually going to be a good cup of coffee. And you can assess, for example, the brew technique. If you think that you've got a really good brew technique, you can bump that up to good, and you can change that value depending on your knowledge of that brew technique. But if there are other factors, like the grounds perhaps are really bad because it turns out they've been sitting in the freezer for 2 years, then you can change that factor. But if you decide the next day to make a cup of coffee with new grounds that are freshly roasted, then once again you can change that factor again. And the point is that the model itself is just a structure. You don't need to rebuild the model every single time you have a new piece of information come in. So that's the beauty of it, is you can incorporate new information, and that information can be experiential. It can be based on traditional and local ecological knowledge. It can be based on sort of scientific studies and hard data, or it can be based on models and projections. So that's sort of the simplicity and beauty of the model. The other thing about the model that has been working really well is you can apply it to really complex systems, and not just species and habitats, but ecosystems and social systems. And this is just one example of an application of this model to the potential range shift of a species in the Hawaiian Islands. I believe it is a bird species, and this is sort of the simple model of some of the species characteristics that might influence its ability to adapt to climate change. So whether or not it has habitat that crosses a wide distribution so that it can migrate through those different zones, whether it has any specialized constraints on reproduction, whether there are any constraints on individuals of the species moving around. But if you look at this highlighted box, the habitat quality in the migration zone, well, you can add as much information as you have available. You can just keep adding information to the model, and until you run out of new information to add, and then you stop running the model, and at that point, you come up with, for that point in time, based on your best available information, you can come up with a vulnerability ranking. But anytime you have new information in the future, you can plug that in. So going through this process, and we've almost completed the first run of this model. It's taken almost 2 years because we've actually been building the model, and we're running over 1,000 bird and plant species through the model. But once the model is built, our expectation is that we will be training our partners to actually utilize the model in a variety of adaptation planning situations. And as I said before, it's not just for biological resources. Some of our partners manage cultural and historic resources, and some have economic interests that they're interested in evaluating. So we'll be training them how to use this particular tool within the larger adaptation planning context. One of the benefits that we've found so far is the ability to pull in any type of threat, not just climate threats. It's really helped us to apply a variety of knowledge systems, and within a species context, that's been really helpful because, as I mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of hard data or long-term data sets, and so we've had to rely a lot on expert opinion and local knowledge. And that, in turn, has helped us to identify some knowledge gaps where we can go back to universities and other research entities and show them our model results and tell them these are really critical gaps that we would like you to be able to fill with your research. And we also fund research, so this is enabling us to better target the research that we will fund in the future. And then it also, because of the dynamic nature of this process and the fact that we've engaged so many of our partners in the building of this model, populating this model, it really has been a tremendous learning experience for us as an organization and for our partner organizations. So as I mentioned in the beginning, our partners, they said they wanted a vulnerability assessment that was better and faster and cheaper, could be done really quickly and covered, huge island landscapes and multiple species and cultural resources. And it turned out that that's not really feasible, but that was an important lesson for our partnership to learn. And the reason we were able to convince our partnership that we needed to focus a little bit more on a more narrow vulnerability assessment is because from the very beginning we engaged our partners that actually are going to be using the outputs. And so this is just reiterating what we've heard already, is that all of these efforts have to be driven by whatever community they are working with. Let's see, what else? Oh, and then the researchers that we got interested in this because of the novelty of this project, we were able to attract some very high caliber scientists and researchers who essentially are donating their time to this project. One of the things we realized very, very early on is that many of our partners had the misconception that a vulnerability assessment would eliminate uncertainty around climate change, and that's obviously not true. We all know that uncertainty exists, and that modeling is going to help us to perhaps constrain uncertainty a little bit, but it won't eliminate it. So it was really important for us to have that conversation up front and keep repeating that conversation through this process. And when we disseminate the model results, that's going to be a key point that we'll have to have a dialogue around is that we cannot eliminate uncertainty through science. That's just not possible. We also found that the interactive dynamic process with the end users was highly valuable. And once again, it's just a tool. It's not an output. The process is what's important, and that's what we've been talking about up to now today. So this is just one tool available in that larger continuum of adaptation work. And then again, the follow-up action on vulnerability assessments once they're conducted. What we found from surveying other researchers who had developed vulnerability assessments and other entities who had conducted them is that without that continuous follow-up, most of the vulnerability assessments just simply were not used. And I don't think we need to talk about why they're important, because we all understand that. Oh, this is Lucas Fortini is the lead scientist of the project, and once we have this first model iteration completed, he'll be working with identifying partners to apply it to other places. And if there's any interest from any of you in talking to him about the applicability of this model to the areas where you're working, then please send him an email. He'd be very happy to talk with you. Thank you. So our funding at this point comes from the United States Department of the Interior. But because of the partnership structure, many of our partners, they donate personnel and resources. So it ends up pretty much, I would say, tripling our available capacity. And we are part of an international network of cooperatives, all of which fund research. There's a cooperative that is just getting up and running in the Caribbean, based out of Puerto Rico, and that they will be granting out money for similar projects. And we grant out money for research in the Pacific Islands. And there are cooperatives that span all of the continental United States, portions of Canada and Mexico. So if any of you are interested in finding out about those cooperatives and funding opportunities through those cooperatives, then please send me an email and I can link you to the geographically appropriate cooperative.
Okay, great. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is, the next activity we had that was more practical was actually meant if we had more participants that didn't have as much extensive experience as you all apparently do. So what we're going to do is to help get into what Francis is doing. He has brought some actual printed material. So we're going to come right back to the middle table again, because I don't want to give you another PowerPoint so soon. And since everyone can maybe look, give their opinion, this is definitely a space where we can have more of our, in my context, in my community, from what I know compared to what Francis is giving us.
So let me start by saying that this was kind of a last minute idea. I brought these anyway because we were invited to for Jeff and Jim. And I wanted to apologize for another colleague of mine from Papua New Guinea. Couldn't make it. Visa problems and communication problems were really difficult to get it all happening. They had to go to the capital 5 days a year to get visas and stuff. And, it didn't work out, but he was going to talk about all this kind of change stuff. I mean, why? Also, so we had a last minute reshuffle to bring this on. And so I thought, trying to talk about what you guys are all working with, but this is just some experiences that we've had in terms of generating